say parinama, right? Change. And in particular, transformative change. Much of this idea about parinama is very similar to, no, that's not what I want to say. What I want to say is, the way that I'm going to structure today's lesson falls in line with the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism. So when we think about the Yoga Sutra as a historical text, it's dated right around the Christian era. And when we say right around, it could be like 200 to 500 before or 200 to 500 after, right? So 1,000 years is right around, right? So when we talk about yoga history, the timeline, don't forget, is enormous, right? So Yoga Sutra is dated right around the Christian era, coincidentally also with the rise of Buddhism. So some commentators will say that Patanjali heard these teachings and incorporated them into the Yoga Sutra. Some will say that the Yoga Sutras are like a refutation of Buddhism or a response to Buddhism, or sort of saying like, I hear what you're saying, but we've been saying it for thousands of years, right? And so the way that I thought I would frame today's discussion is is related to the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism. Say, Chatvari,
Chatvari,
Arya,
Arya,
Satyani,
Satyani,
Arya Satyani.
Arya Satyani.
So, you guys know what's Chatvari?
Four.
It is indeed. This is a totally literal translation, and it is. So the language of Buddhism is Pali, which is one of the languages spoken on the Indian subcontinent. We were talking the other day about how many languages are there. There's another one, Pali. But many of the Buddhist terms are also rendered into Sanskrit. Arya. Arya. That's the word that means noble. Maybe I'll do different color yet. And then you know this one. There's the truthful part, right? And because it's plural, that's the plural ending. So the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism. One might ask, what are the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism? So the first one is Sarvam Dukkam. Yes. I'll just keep on writing.
I'll copy out the attorney. Yeah, I don't trust you.
But you were close. You just think of the dukkam. Okay. So, say dukkha. It's an interesting word to pronounce, right? Because there's a visarga right in the middle. So you have to give this little sacrifice of breath, immediately followed by a mahaprana. And if you don't know these words that I'm saying, don't worry about it. You don't need to know the rules in order to make the sound. But the more that you come to class, the more you'll learn the rules, right? So say dukkam.
Dukkam.
Mm-hmm. So dukkam is often translated as suffering, pain. And what's sarva? Salamba sarvangasana. What's sarva?
Support.
That's the salamba part.
Isn't it all?
All. So the first noble truth, like, oh man, that sucks. Right? All is suffering. So there is a Yoga Sutra that corresponds to this, and I don't know if everybody brought their sutras or not, but it is book 2, and it's sutra number 15. Here is the first time in the sutras that we encounter the word parinama. Parinama-tapa samskara dukhair gunavritti virodhacha dukkameva sarvam vivekinaha. Okay, so that's it chanted. It's book 2, sutra number 15. Do you hear the words at the end? Dukkam eva sarvam vivekinaha. So these two words are there also, right? So here's Patanjali also telling us all is suffering. But Patanjali makes it he gives us a little bit more qualification. He gives us a little bit more explanation when he says vivekinaha. Amanda, what's viveka?
Discriminative discernment.
Discriminative discernment. And so that's viveka, and vivekinaha, or vivekin, is a person who has discriminative discernment. So to the person who has discriminative discernment, all is suffering. And so now you're thinking, but wait a minute, aren't we supposed to cultivate discriminative discernment so that we don't have so much suffering? So the idea is that the person with discriminative discernment can see the suffering. We can see it. And if we can see it, what can we do to it? Change it, right? The person who is not awake, the person who does not have viveka, the person who does not have discriminative discernment, lives their life suffering without knowing why. And so here is why we practice yoga. So that to alleviate human suffering, right? That's Dave would say that. So here we are now. We're developing some viveka through our various practices. We're developing some ability to make discriminative choices, to make wise choices. And now that we can make wise choices, we might ask ourselves, why do I feel like this? Why am I suffering? Why do I have these thought patterns? Why am I thinking this? Why do I behave in this way over and over and over again? Now we have some viveka, and we can kind of figure it out, okay? So we'll talk more about this in a second. But right now, first noble truth, all is suffering. Yeah, and we have some qualifications from the sutras. Good on this so far? Okay. Noble truth number 4.
We're going from 1 to 4.
Sorry. Noble truth number 2. What is the truth of the cause of the suffering? Or we might say, I don't have a Sanskrit word for this necessarily. I mean, we could apply one, but I don't have one right at the moment. But there is a cause. Because if you were suffering and you thought it was just random, horrible suffering, then it would really be bad, right? But when we know that there is indeed a cause of this suffering, now we can do something about it. Yes, so in the Buddhist text it will say, craving for and clinging to what is pleasurable and aversion to what is not pleasurable result in this suffering. And I'll ask my Yoga Sutra scholars, what would be the Sanskrit words, they're from the Yoga Sutra, that correspond with this idea of clinging to what is pleasurable or clinging to prior pleasure, and then aversion to pain. It's in the klesha.
So from brahmacharya.
No.
Abhinivesha.
It's in that list.
Okay, wait. Say them again.
Clinging to prior pleasure. So I cause myself to suffer because I am remembering a time when something wonderful happened and that event will never come again. And so I'm causing myself to suffer. Or I had a pleasurable experience in the past, and because I had that pleasurable experience in the past, I continue to seek that pleasurable experience in the future, even though it might not be causing me pleasure anymore. So clinging to this. Okay. It's raga.
Damn it, I should have just said it.
So raga is this idea of clinging to prior pleasure.
Number 3.
Sorry, my dear?
It's number 3.
No, this is related to number 2. There is a cause. What is the cause? Clinging to prior pleasure. And then the other one is aversion to pain, right? You touch a hot stove, we don't touch the hot stove again. So it is seeking to distance ourselves from situations or people or thoughts that we perceive might cause us pain. So kind of running away, being fearful.
Dvesha?
Dvesha.
Very good. I'm so glad I'm sitting next to you.
She's been here for a while. Dvesha. Somebody can check my spelling. I think that is correct. Can tell me if I have the right S on this. If you have your Yoga Sutra book, the klesha are found in book 2, sutra number 3 is the list of the klesha.
I'm sorry, so number 2 is there is a cause, and what is the cause?
These two things.
Say the first one again.
Clinging to prior pleasure and aversion to pain. So we don't even need the word prior. Clinging to pleasure and aversion to pain.
I think I heard it first defined as desire, raga, desire.
Craving.
Craving, yeah.
Okay. And there is a lot in the Yoga Sutra that talks about this, right? Because this whole section on the klesha, will give you a lot about raga and dvesha. Okay? But for today, we have another topic to discuss. Okay? So there is a cause for this suffering. Noble truth number 3. We'll just call it S. Suffering can be ended. Thank goodness, right? So we're living our lives, we're feeling some suffering, we're like, oh man, everything is suffering. Okay, I'm getting some viveka, I'm getting some discrimination, I'm doing some yoga, I'm kind of figuring myself out. Maybe I get some therapy. Therapy goes along with Yoga Sutra. Maybe I get some therapy, I kind of figure stuff out. All right, why am I suffering? Well, I'm suffering because I'm maybe holding on to something or projecting something into the future, or I'm afraid of something, and so it's causing me this suffering. But it can be ended. Woohoo, right? Very optimistic. Putting an end to this craving and clinging means that heyam dukkhamanagatam. So means that future suffering can be avoided. So that one is book 2, number 16. Heyam dukkhamanagatam. So suffering in the future can be avoided, right?
Is that
so
book 2?
Book 2, number 16. Mm-hmm. So not only can the suffering that you feel today be ended, but future suffering can be avoided. This is getting a whole lot better, right? I mean, we started off with all this pain, but now we're like, oh, okay, thank goodness. Number 4. There is a path. There is a way. There is a prescribed way to end suffering. And that's even more optimistic, right? Because now you're not just left like thrown to the wolves all by yourself. I know there's some way to do it, but I don't really quite know how. No, there is a path. There is a way. There is a series of steps. Say krama. Krama, K-R-A-M-A means step, right? It also means sequence, a sequence of events. There is a sequence that you can follow. So, back to parinama, back to transformation. Why do we change? To end suffering, right? Why do we want to change? Because of number 1, right? We want to change because we feel like there is something that is not right. This author, Bryant, he suggests that frustration is a pretty good word to use for dukkha. Not only suffering and pain, because suffering and pain, we hear it and it comes along with some baggage about like physicalness, like maybe you're suffering because you're sick, or you're suffering because you are in a Oh my God, because you live in Nepal and there was just an earthquake and you live on the street, right? I mean, so that kind of thing. But his suggestion is to consider it also frustration, right? Because now it brings it up to the level of the mind. We're not just the level of the physical body. And so this dukkha, this frustration, it comes from the attempt, Patanjali says this also, to find permanent satisfaction in a world in which everything is changing. So now we need 2 more Sanskrit words. So I heard you say them, so would you like to tell us what they are?
Purusha.
Purusha.
Yeah.
Purusha, short.
Okay, Purusha and Prakriti.
And?
Purusha being the self and Prakriti being everything else.
Right. So Prakriti, Prakrit means nature. So Prakriti is everything that exists in the phenomenal world. Everything that we can perceive through our 5 senses. And then Purusha is unchanging. So again, this could be a whole nother topic, a whole nother discussion in and of itself. But we can think of it as the big S self. If you have a religious bent, you might consider it your soul. It is the part of you that doesn't change. If you do not have a religious bent, but you enjoy like observing the workings of the mind, you can think of it as the witnessing consciousness. The part of you that is watching you all the way through your life. So right now, there's a part of you that's watching you, listening to me talk, right? Maybe you can deduce that, right? And if you think about that part of you that is watching you, listening to me talk, that part of you is the same, exactly the same as it was when you were a kid, right? So the witness consciousness, so the thing that doesn't change. So in the Yoga Sutra, back in the list of the klesha, right, the afflictions, Patanjali says, avidya, ignorance, is the #1 cause of suffering. And what is it that we are ignorant about? We keep mistaking what is changeable for what does not change. Ignorance. Avidya. And because we keep making this mistake, we keep causing ourselves to suffer. When we think about, why do we change? Well, because we're suffering in some way, right? If everything was good, there wouldn't be any need to change. But we have this frustration, we have this discomfort, we have this dissatisfaction with some area of our lives, and so we feel the need to change. Now, I'm going to tell you another Sanskrit word. It's and that is, and this is another one that's related to Buddhism, yeah? And this is trilakshana. What is 3? 3. And lakshana, qualities, 3 qualities.
And that's in Pali?
No, this is Sanskrit.
Okay.
I could probably find you a better word for lakshana. Let me see if I can do it quickly. It's right around here somewhere. I know it is. Because we're going to talk about it in more depth. Yeah, it's a difficult word to translate into English, right? And so quality, characteristics is another way. That by which something is indicated. Indicators. Okay. So there's 3 indicators. Now, why did I not write this? Where did I put it? Hold on, I put it somewhere. Oh, I just put it in a different place. Okay. So, trilakshana, yeah? So what are the three indicators that you are living a human life? Right? This is Buddha. This is Buddha. This is not Yoga Sutra. This is not Patanjali. This is Buddha. Right? Three lakshana. Three indicators that you are living a human life. Number one, anitya, impermanence. At the end of Ashtanga class, don't we chant? I have to think of it now. I have to like catch up in the whole chant. Swasti prajabhya paripalayanta nyayena margena mahin mahisha go brahmanebhya shubhamastu nityam, right? So here's anitya, right? So the opposite of permanence. I'll just throw that at you if that's okay. The opposite of permanence, impermanence. Okay, so anitya, impermanence. Dukkha, right? All is dukkha. That's a D, right? Can write in Sanskrit, cannot always write in English. We'll say dissatisfaction, pain, suffering, frustration, right? And anatman. Atman is another word for something that we just talked about. Self. Yes. So it's another word for Purusha, right? It's the biggest self, the soul. And when we have anatman, non-self. So I read this and I was like, what the heck does that mean? Impermanence I got, right? Because it's the whole deal about what we're talking about. Everything is going to change. And if we hook our sense of who we are and our happiness onto things that are changing, thinking that they're not going to change, then we are going to cause ourselves to suffer, right? And not only like we're going to suffer because that's the way the world is. No. We are going to cause it. We're going to make it happen because we have a choice not to do that thing. So if you do that thing, you're causing yourself to suffer. So like impermanence, I'm down with, right? Dukkha, I'm also pretty down with. And now we get to anatman. It's like not self, qua. So here's something that I pulled out the quote for you. For something to be anatman, according to this view, it needed three components. For something to be atman, right? So we're going to define anatman by defining what it's not. Yeah, good? Good. Okay, so in order for something to be atman, it needed three components. It needed to have complete control over the body, feelings, thoughts, impulses, intentions, consciousness, or perceptions. So number one, complete control over the totality of your existence. Number two, it had to be permanent. And number three, it had to be blissful. In this discourse, the Buddha makes it clear that nothing in our psychophysical experience has these three qualities. And therefore, nothing in our psychophysical experience is fit to be regarded as Atman. I think that's really interesting.
I love that. Will you send that? Will you email that quote?
Maybe.
Okay.
Yes.
So,
yes, I will, if I remember.
Okay, so I'm just wrapping my head around this whole thing.
I know.
You said something that stuck out to me back in last intensive, and it was using labels to define yourself.
Vritti.
So using the vritti, kind of is pulling my mind with this whole. Would you say that's fair, or is that a whole different?
No, totally fair.
Okay.
Yeah. All of these ideas are related, right?
Okay.
So the vritti are the fluctuations of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And one way that the vritti manifests themselves is how we identify ourselves, right? That's like, that's a really big vritti. And so if we see ourselves according to some label, I am a student, I am a teacher, I am a mother, I am a father, I am a wife, I am a husband, right? We are setting ourselves up for suffering, right? Because those things can change, and they do. so that is important in understanding, vritti, and it's all related, because unless you know that, then you can't understand that. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay, and that you would like to know it, and it was also related to the Buddhist precept, so I figured I'd pop it in here. All right, so I'm going back to my outline. Idea number one, all is suffering, right? And this parinama, tapa, samskara, dukkha, right? So we have the same thing in the Yoga Sutras that we do in Buddhism. Number two, why do we change? Why do we want to change? Well, because we want to get away from this suffering. How does this dukkha manifest? Or in other words, what is the cause of suffering? So one answer comes earlier in the Yoga Sutras, and this is the concept of the klesha. I've mentioned it a few times today. It's earlier in Book 2. The list of the klesha, if I remember correctly, is Sutra number 3 in Book 2, and then there's several sutras that talk about the kleshas, the afflictions. So we've just been touching on a few of them here. In this sutra, in Sutra number 15, Patanjali really is telling us about more details about the causes of suffering. Okay, so if you have your book handy, you can take a look at the words. Parinama tapa samskara dukkhair gunavritti virodhaja dukkhameva sarvam vivekinaha. In the first part of this sutra is where he's telling us, how does this dukkha manifest, right? So if we want to change something, we have to understand it. This is the point that I'm trying to make, right? If we want to change something, we have to understand it. If we don't understand it, how can we do the opposite? How can we change it? So, what is the cause of suffering? This parinama dukkha. So by consequences of actions, okay? Or the suffering that comes from change. And this is the suffering that comes from raga and dvesha. Okay? So by the consequences of our actions, living life, clinging to pleasurable things, avoiding painful things, right? Some change happens. This is the parinama part, right? And so makes some suffering. Good? Mm-hmm. Okay? Tapa dukkha. Tapas, heat, intensity. When we think of tapas in the context of the 8 limbs, we'll translate it also as passion and discipline and austerity and motivation and all of those things. But here it is even more literally heat, burning pain, tapa samskara. And this is simply pain itself. And this I might need the tissues for. Because this is the pain that arises from impermanence. Sorry, you guys. This is the pain that arises from impermanence, right? And if I was kind of hoping that Julie T-Bell would be here, because she introduced me to these podcasts, Dharma Punks. They're excellent, and they're free, and you can listen to them. And the guy who does them, his name is Josh Korda, and he talks a lot about this. And he just comes right out, and he's like, you know what? This is another way of describing the Trilakshana. You're gonna die. Everyone that you know and everyone that you love is gonna die. You're born into a human body, and so chances are you'll also get sick. In addition, you'll get old, and so will everyone else. These cannot be avoided, right? This is the type of suffering that cannot be avoided. You're born in a human existence, so if you're lucky, you're gonna get old. At some point in your life, you're probably gonna get sick. And ultimately, we're all gonna die. This is the suffering that cannot be avoided. Everything else is optional. That's kind of cool. So, this impermanence, right? We're all going to die. Everything will pass away. And I have something else to say about that, but I'm going to wait for a second. Okay, so that's the tapa dukkha, right? That's just the pain itself. The third thing, samskara dukkha. What's samskara? Habits. Yep. If we live an unconscious life, even in part, we will find ourselves falling into habits, right? I'm sure that this is why we even have this expression in English, right? Because if you were walking along the street and you saw a big hole and you were conscious of it, you would not fall into it. But if you're walking along the street and you're not conscious of it, boop, and you go into the hole. Same thing with samskara, right? If you do something and you are conscious of it, then you can make a wise choice if it's a good thing to do again or if it's not a good thing to do again. But if you're not conscious of it, and it fulfills some need inside of you, which don't think that that's always a good thing, right? Like it could be it's usually a need for ego gratification, right? So if it gratifies the ego in some way, then we're going to do it over and over again because it feels good. And it feels good in the moment, right? You may remember preya and shreya. I don't want to get too much into the weeds because I think I already am, but try to bring it back. But if we are not conscious about it, then it will become a habit, right? Then this behavior will become a habit. And so it could be something as simple as when I was, I'm trying to think of how old I was. I must have been 20. I think it was the summer in between my junior year and my senior year of college. And I had this job, and it was my first office job, and I was a receptionist, and I hated it. And every day when I would come home, every single day after work, I lived on the East Coast, I would stop at Carvel. I don't know if you have Carvel here, but we sure did on the East Coast. And I would get a chocolate milkshake every day. So that's a habit, right? I hated that job, and so every day I stopped and got a chocolate milkshake. So there was a samskara. But it could also be a samskara for every time, X person, it does some behavior, your reaction is Y, right? Without even thinking about it. Yeah? Okay, good. Samskara.
Does samskara have a negative connotation?
Yes.
Some habits are, like healthy habits?
Yes. This is a big discussion that Dave and I used to have a lot. Some habits are healthy habits. So technically, samskara is non-judgmental, right? Because there are some, but I disagree. In the context of the Yoga Sutra, samskara is always negative. Okay? By its very nature, it is something that we do unconsciously. Hence, has some negative.
Probably because even if it's a healthy habit, you're so ingrained in doing it.
You don't even think about it.
Yeah, and so, but it's kind of like even like a healthy habit, you don't want that to change in a way. Like you wouldn't be open to change. Does that make sense?
Right, if you adopt,
like you should be open to change.
If
so
you
even
adopt one thing and you think, okay, this is definitely healthy, I'm going to stick with it, you might then miss the opportunity to find a healthier habit as well.
This was explained to me one
or
time.
that can take you so much into like a weird, I don't know how to explain it. Like you can be so enthralled with that it gets to a bad thing.
I try to use the simplest example possible, right? So a healthy habit is brushing your teeth every day. So you brush your teeth every day, and every day you use Crest toothpaste, and you really like Crest toothpaste, and then you go to the drugstore, and now there's no Crest toothpaste. What are you going to do?
That's a good way. That's a good example.
Right? Okay. So the simplest explanation is sometimes the best. Okay. So back us up and try to see go back to the big picture again, right? We're talking about why do we want to change? We want to change because of suffering. How does this suffering manifest, right? How does it happen? Well, now Patanjali is talking to us in this sutra. There's 4 ways that this suffering manifests. One is the parinama dukkha, right? The change, the raga and dvesha that we spoke about before. Second way is the tapa dukkha, the pain that is simply the pain, right? The pain that is caused because of impermanence, the pain that is in the Buddhist view the pain that cannot be avoided, right? Simply because you live a human life, you're going to have this pain and it can't be avoided. Okay. Third, by samskara. Okay. So I feel like everybody has pretty good grasp of samskara. Okay. The example that Bryant used is a hangover, right? So you go out, you have a really fun time, and get a hangover. Now the question is, do you go and do it again next week? Right? And if you're in college, maybe you do. So, right? But it's something that a lot of people have an actual experience with, and so can relate to it. So samskara, by our habits. And then the fourth way that that pain is caused is this phrase guna vritti virodach. Okay, so guna. Mm-hmm. The primary forces of creation, the qualities of nature, sattva, rajas, and tamas. Again, this is something that we could have a whole discussion on, but we're just touching on it here. Vritti, there's the activity, so the movement of the guna. And then the virodach is due to the conflict. So we could say due to the movement of the guna. So in other words, our mind is part of nature, right? We exist in the phenomenal world. Our brain exists in the phenomenal world. And so like the simple way to look at it is because our mind is always changing. And whether our mind is always changing because the electrical impulses are moving in a different way, because we took some substance that caused our brain to behave a certain way, for good or for bad, or because we simply decided that we're going to think something else, right? So on any level, the mind is always changing because it's a part of nature. It can't not change, okay? So these are the four ways that suffering happens. Parinama dukkha, samskara dukkha, and gunavritti dukkha, right? Those three. So if you made a numbered list, it's number 1, number 3, and number 4. These things can be alleviated, or they can be changed by the means of viveka, by the means of discriminative discernment, and even more particularly by the means of pratipaksha bhavana. We have had entire classes about this topic. This is one of my favorite concepts in the sutra. That's a vibhavanam. Pratipaksha bhavanam is very effective with samskara dukkha because the idea is to cultivate the opposite. Pratipaksha bhavanam is the underlying concept in cognitive behavioral therapy. When something negative arises, it could be a thought, it could be an action, it could be anything. When something negative arises within us, and we don't want to do it, right? It's a samskara, right? How do we change it? By cultivating the opposite. It's easy to say, but it's hard to do. Because the first thing that needs to happen is we need to be able to have a moment of clarity. We need to be able to have a moment of objectivity. And very often when we're in these situations, they are stressful in some way. And so, the phrase in English, you get your buttons pushed, right? So when we have a samskara and the samskara is activated, we unconsciously respond to the samskara, right? My sister says this, and I respond this way. But if I had a moment to think about it, just a moment to kind of stop, right? My sister says this, and I respond. Wait a minute. Hopefully, in this moment of clarity, in this moment of objectivity, we begin to see clearly, right? This is viveka. We begin to have viveka, about all of the potential choices that are available to us. And just because I always used to behave, my sister says this and I say that, doesn't mean I have to do that today. And not only do I have one different way to respond, probably have an infinite number of ways to, there's probably a lot of different options. Even if not infinite, there's probably a lot of different options that I can choose from. And so in this moment of clarity, can I choose a different option? Can I choose a better option that will cause a different outcome? Easy to say, hard to do.
And like pausing before you react.
Yep. And choosing, right? Because you can pause before you react and then still react the same way. And sometimes that's a choice. Sometimes that reaction is so gratifying to the ego that you're like, I'm just going to do it anyway. Yeah?
At least it's an action versus a reaction.
Yeah, it's definitely, right? Any little baby step along the way. No effort on this path is ever wasted. This is from the Bhagavad Gita, right? And it is true. No, any effort that we make is going to pay off. No effort on the path is wasted. And so, you're right. Just to get the moment of clarity is a victory, you know? And then even if you make the same choice, it's still a victory because you made a choice, you know? Then if you make a different choice, woohoo, it's yet another victory, right? Yoga philosophy from the Yoga Sutra, I like to call yoga practicality, right? Because it really is a lot about taking action and doing things. Yeah, so it's good. All right. See, again, I get too far down in the weeds if I'm not careful. All right. So 1, 3, and 4, right? This parinama dhuka, samskara dhuka, gunavritti dhuka can all be changed, alleviated with viveka, with pratipaksha bhavanam. But number 2, the tapa dhuka, it just has to be accepted. So, you know this serenity prayer, right? Give me the strength to accept things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference, right? That's the idea with tapa dukkha. Yeah. Good. So this little discussion then has covered, hold on, I used the wrong term in my own notes. Yes. Okay, so we're still on the truth of suffering. Okay, good. All right. We desire to end our dukkha, right? We desire to end our pain. And now, here we go. I'm back up now. So now we're on back to our 4 noble truths, right? So up until now we've been kind of talking about noble truth number 1 and 2. Yes, you with me? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Yep. So now we're going to move on and we're going to talk about noble truth number 3 briefly, because it is possible to end that dukkha. And now that we know that it's possible to end that dukkha, we desire to change. Yes? And this is our pratipaksha bhavanam. Good? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Now, how do we effect that change? How do we do it? And what is the path? In order to, okay, so what is the path? That is the question. I'm going to take another little sidebar. In your notes might end up looking like an outline, right? Because we said there's 4 noble truths, right? And so that's a big idea. And then, we talked about what they were, and then we got some information on them, right? And then we talked about, right? So number 1, the big idea. Big idea number 1, a little bit of information. Big idea number 2, some information. Yes? Yeah. Okay, good. Because this is also the structure of the Yoga Sutra. Okay? It goes like this. You get the big idea and then you get the description of it. Okay? So, when we're talking about, we're up to noble truth number 4 now. What is the path to change? Or the question, how do I do it? How do I make this change? How do I affect this change? I'm all excited now. I know the change is possible. So how do I do it? Okay. So now like the indented part, right? The little part. Well, first of all, we have to understand the nature of change. So this is Nikolai Bachman, and he says that I need my glasses. Wow. The current state of each individual heart and mind is the result of past experiences and habitual patterns. Contemplation of these changes can reveal valuable information about how they arrived in their present state. By understanding these long-standing habitual patterns, as well as our genetic traits, we can glimpse what might have happened in our past to create them, and even predict how they might play out in our future. Okay, that's a little introduction. And then we go back to the sutras, and the sutra I'm going to reference is Book 3, Sutra number 9. Okay. How did we get here? How did I get to this state? Vyuttana nirodha samskarayor abhibhava pradurbhava nirodakshana chittanvayo nirodha parinamaha. So there's that parinama again, there's that change. So this is information for us, right? So there are two worlds in which we can live. There are two samskaras. Let's just go with that for a second. There are two worlds in which we can live. We can live in the world of emergence, or we can live in the world of restraint. Okay. So, emergence, externalization. We can live in the external world, or we can live in the internal world. Okay, we'll go with that. This vyuttana. This is the external world. This is the world of emergence. This is the world, my teacher Sonia calls it distraction. In Sanskrit or in English? Vyuttana. Do you want me to write it?
Yes, please.
See if I can give you some more words for it. Yeah, the state of being turned outward. So if we are always living in this state of being turned outward, if we are always living in the distraction, we will never be able to end our suffering. Instead, we need to cultivate some of this restraint, some of this internalization. And in this sutra, they use the word nirodha. Remember we said nirodha is the process and the goal of yoga, right? So nirodha, some internalization and some restraint. So, how do we end suffering? Number one, we have to go inside. Maybe it's meditation, maybe it's sitting quietly, maybe it's praying, right? Because I always want to be very clear, yoga is not a religion. But there are things, if you have a personal religious practice, that are very congruent with yoga philosophy and kind of sort of say the same thing, right? And so if you are somebody who prays, then Patanjali is saying, like, right on, person who prays, because this can help your suffering, right? So it's this turning inside. Good. So now we're starting to understand the nature of change. If I want to change, I have to look inside. I have to turn inward. Also, okay, so that's Sutra 3.9, yeah? In Sutra 3.11, I haven't chanted this one in a long time, so I'm not going it tells us that when we do that, then we will have the disappearance of scattered attention and the rise of one-pointed attention, right? So that's like the answer to that question. Okay, I'm feeling like I'm with you. I'm going to turn inside, but what can I expect will happen? oh, well, what you can expect will happen is you'll be able to focus more, you'll be able to concentrate more, and you will find more peace.
What sutra was that?
3:11. So like 9, 10, 11 are all sort of talking about this idea. Next, I would like to take you to 13. Okay? So because of all of this turning inward, practicing more inwardness, and developing single point, avoiding the scattered concentration and avoiding the single concentration, then comes the transformation, this is number 13, of the form, the characteristics, and the conditions. This one I might be able to chant for you. Yeah. Etena bhutendriyeshu dharma lakshana vasta parinama Vyakhyattaha. Close. Okay. So the key words in here, dharma, which we know from another context, right? So in the Bhagavad Gita, how would you describe dharma?
Life's purpose.
Your purpose. Yep, your life's purpose.
Duty.
But in this context, we're using the word dharma. So dharma is that which upholds. And so we're using dharma to describe the concept of form. The gross form of an object, meaning the gross form of us, right, of our mind. Lakshana is the next word. And remember we had 3 lakshana, right? Remember? Yeah? So those characteristics. If it's cold, you can turn the air conditioning off.
no,
It was
I'm
just to
fine.
move the air around. Okay.
Cheryl, when you said form, characteristics, and conditions,
Mm-hmm.
what about them? I missed that part. They change, they...
Transformation. Evolve.
Right. If we want to, remember we're talking about how do we change. So we're understanding the nature of change. So one thing about understanding the nature of change is avoid the vyutthana, right? We have to go inside, avoid the externalization. Then we also have to remember that change can occur in form, in characteristics, or in condition. Okay? So lakshana, in this case, is going to mean characteristics. And then avastha, that's the word that will mean condition.
Can you, I'm sorry, spell those?
I can make them. In another color.
So interesting. It's just
Oh, I'm so glad.
much,
I'm
you
so
know,
glad.
You can go off on like a tangent.
Because I really
It's
want to
really
be
like-
clear,
yeah.
but in order to keep moving down the path, I have to like define things and bring things that, in order to keep moving. So good. All right. So far, so good. Yeah. All right. So here we are. We're at Sutra number 13. We're talking about how do we change, right? And so in order to understand change, we also have to understand dharma, lakshana, and avastha. So the examples that are given are usually clay or gold, right? So clay, so when we talk about dharma, form, clay is made into a pot. It's not made into a cup. It's not made into a plate. Therefore, the pot is that clay's specific dharma. When we see the clay on the ground, the clay could be anything. So the clay itself exists in the world of potential, right? It could be anything. But when we make it into something, it has this specific form. It has this specific dharma. So dharma refers to the gross form of an object. From the undifferentiated ocean of Prakriti, an object manifests. The first stage is the interaction of the guna, which produces the gross elements. These gross elements then come together into material objects making Prakriti visible to our senses. Remember that in yoga philosophy, the word object doesn't only refer to hard things, right? It refers to our mind. It refers to ideas and beliefs that we hold, right? So things that exist in the mind are also objects. So things that exist in your mind also have a form. Does that make sense? Yay, I'm so glad. Now, characteristics. This object has some type of situation. Yeah, it has some type of situation in time, right? Because that's part of being in nature, is that we're bounded by time and space. So the pot can exist in the present. It could have existed in the past, or if it's yet to be made, it will still exist in the future. Okay, so another way to think about it. You were a child. Now you're an adult. Someday, hopefully, you'll be an old person. And so when we think about how to change, we need to take into account our characteristics. Our characteristics. Where are we in time? Yes? Okay. And then avastha, the condition. Would you like to hear what this author says about characteristics, since I read about form? Okay. Having come into being, the form of the newly created object is altered due to the ever-shifting mix of the guna. Over the course of time, characteristics that have only been implied in an object, right? So the clay that has the potential to be anything, right? The characteristics that have only been implied in an object or entity are revealed. The oak tree is implied in the acorn. It manifests as a tree only within the context of the succession of the individual changes we call time. Krama, right? The succession of moments, the parade of moments, if you will. That's a beautiful phrase. The succession of individual changes we call time. From seed to seedling to mature tree to firewood to ash. Each stage reveals something about the nature of the tree. Each object has its own unique internal clock determined by the mix and the interplay of the guna. So once again, I just remind you, not only are we talking about material objects, right? We're also talking about thoughts, ideas, relationships. Relationships, right, also, okay. Condition, avastha. So the condition that the object is in, it's a new pot, right? Back to our clay pot. It's a new pot. It's an old pot. It's a shiny pot. It's a dull pot, right? So what condition is it in? And this author is Carrera, is his last name. As you can tell by my marks, I really like this guy. He says, this condition refers to the state the object is in, right? So is it coming into being? Is it strengthening? Is it whole? Is it deteriorating? Is it dissolving out of being? Each object passes through all of these stages unless acted upon by an outside force. The orderly succession of evolutionary changes can be altered by its environment, which can enhance, hamper, interrupt, or halt it. The natural evolution of the oak tree can be altered by factors such as lightning, weather, fire, or human or other outside intervention. Okay? Okay. So these three factors, form, character, and condition, explain how nirodha, environment, and effort interact to bring together transformation of the mind.
Did you say that again?
Yes. Form, character, and condition, right? You can relate it to nirodha, environment, and effort. There's also this idea of awareness, right? To have the awareness, say that what you want to change is your relationship with your boss, right? That's the thing that's causing you to suffer, and so it needs to change. So what is the form of that relationship, right? Well, it's your boss, right? So like Can you change that? Yes, as a matter of fact, you can, because you can always get another job, right? So there's the form, right? There's the characteristics. What are the characteristics like in that relationship? What is the condition? Is it old? Is it new? Is it this? Is it that? Right? Yeah. Okay. All right. So we're learning more about change. We're learning more about the nature of change, and that's what we're understanding right now. Yes. Good. And now I have one more thing. Oh, I think I read this part to you already. Yeah. And I think I'm going to read it to you again, because this is how we started this discussion on if we want to effect change, and we know, Buddha says there's a path to change, and Patanjali is saying, here are the steps that you're going to take in order to change. So the first step is we have to understand the nature of change. The current state of each individual heart and mind is the result of past experiences and habitual patterns. Contemplation of these changes can reveal valuable information about how they arrived in their present state. In these words, can you hear this discussion that we just had about dharma, lakshana, and avastha, about form, condition, and change? Okay, good. By understanding these patterns, as well as our genetic traits, we can glimpse what might have happened in our past to create them, and even predict how they might play out in our future. And then maybe I'll go on a little bit more. If we surround ourselves with positive influence, maybe I don't want to do this yet. Okay, that's okay. Because first we have to understand the nature of change. Okay. All right. Good? Okay. Next step. We have to be willing to follow the path. The path is laid out for us, but we have to be willing to follow it. We have to be willing to do the work. In all honesty, this is why I do not weigh 130 pounds. Because I am not willing to do the work. I know what the path is, and I am not willing to do it today. Maybe tomorrow. Intentional change, Nikolai says, can be difficult and uncomfortable. And I would suggest will be difficult and uncomfortable, or can be difficult and will be uncomfortable, maybe is a good way to put it. The easiest way to change is to map out small steps toward a realistic goal and then commit to the process. This is the doing the work part. You have to be willing to do the work. We have the power to transform these harmful thoughts, harmful words, harmful actions into more positive and meaningful energy. And indeed, deliberate and conscious change can move us in a more helpful direction and gradually allow that negative past to fade away behind us. Rapid change is rarely sustainable, with the exception of tapa, right? With that impermanent stuff, right? But real lasting change usually happens gradually over time, often without us even being aware that it's going on. Every interaction, okay, so I'm going to stop there because that's the next thing. So Dave would call this the nature of incrementality. He'd use that word a lot, incrementality. And he would use it specifically referring to your asana practice, okay? That your asana practice is you're not going to probably have a day when you walk into class and all of a sudden, ta-da, I have it. Unless you have had a whole series of progressive, small, subtle changes that lead up to that day when we experience that moment when the change happens. And if you think in that context, I assume like most of us have had this experience, right? You work on something, you're like, oh, I got it. It's not just the result of that day. It's the result of the 3 months of work that you put into it, or the 6 months of work that you put, or the 6 years of work that you put into it. So think about children growing up, right? I often hear parents say, you know, the baby is Krista, and right, the baby is born. Look at the baby is born, and now he's 9 weeks old, and everybody says, I can't believe how big he is, because every day you don't see the incremental change, but you have the picture when the baby was born, you have the picture of the baby at 9 weeks. Oh my goodness, what a big change it is. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Book 3, number 15. Basically, is Patanjali saying this, right? Krama, that sequential progression, those steps, succession, right? All of this is in this word. Yeah. Successive sequential changes are the reason for the transformations, are the reason for parinama. And then I look at people who make their living in the fitness industry. Isn't this what you teach us every day? And I'll ask Heidi, right? Right?
Yeah.
Rapid change is rarely sustainable.
Absolutely.
But make a plan, commit to it, right? These words, where did these words go?
Absolutely.
The easiest way, I love you, Nikolai, the easiest way to change is to map out small steps toward a realistic goal and then commit to the process. And that's what Patanjali says in book 3, number 15. Only he says it in Sanskrit.
Cheryl, is there a reason why, like, all of the, you know, you have book 9, 11, 13, and then 15, why they're all odd numbers?
No, they're related, but you know, Patanjali is kind of filling in the gaps, and I'm just trying to give you the highlights.
Oh, okay.
You certainly go back and read it as a section. You know, I'm just, like I said, I'm just filling in the highlights. Like in the previous one, in 14, he talks about, yeah, the substratum, and I would not want to go into this discussion because I don't even know that I understand it myself.
It's kind of elaborating. Okay.
Exactly.
I see.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, can you say the easiest way to change is map out small steps to a realistic goal?
Right?
And
And then commit to the process. You have to be willing to do the work. And there's the question, right? So whether it's me wishing, after seeing some pictures I was telling you guys, you know, wishing that I could be thinner, or whether it is somebody who has an honest, you know, an addiction and feels like, oh, I feel like I'd like to change, and then they go back to the same thing, right? You have to be willing to do the work. And you have to be honest with yourself, right? Because if you're not willing to, because there's another way that you can cause yourself to suffer, right? I think of my grandmother, actually, because my grandmother, I feel like I can hear her saying this every day. She would say, I've got to get some of this weight off. It's a family thing, yeah. But I've got to get some of this weight off. I've got to get some of this weight off. I've got every day, you know? When, in fact, if you would just kind of objectively say, yes, I would like to have this outcome, but I'm not willing to put in the effort to do it. Less suffering. Or suffering of a different kind, perhaps, right? But less suffering. And more sort of, I don't know if this is even a phrase, I'm making it up, conscious suffering. It's that choosing, that choice. Choosing to not be as happy as one might be. Because it's gratifying to the ego in the moment. Okay. Tvesha, yeah. No, not Tvesha. We'll have to think of another word for that.
Well, I just like how you said it, being honest with yourself.
Yeah. Yep.
Huge.
Okay. So this part of the, how do we affect change? What is the path to change? When we think where we started, right, with the 4 noble truths, this is talking about noble truth number 4. There is a path to change. All right? Tell me it. Okay. Well, first you have to understand the nature of change. And so we talked about the distraction and not living in the distraction, but coming internal, spending more time inside. We have to come internal, whether it's meditation, prayer, thinking, you know, whatever it is. We have to come internal so that we no longer have the scattered thinking. We have ekagrata, we have single-pointed thinking. So Also, to understand the nature of the form, the conditions, right? There's aspects to the issue that, if we understand those aspects, we'll better be able to understand how to change them. Yes, good. Remember Dharma Lakshana. Okay. Then, next step number 2. Once we know this, now we have to be willing to do the work. Now we have to be willing to take those steps. This is book 3, number 15, the nature of incrementality, this idea about mapping out small changes, map them out, commit to the process. And then finally, we will be able to see the result of the change only after some time, maybe only at the end. It is very difficult to perceive change while it is happening. So we touched on that briefly, right? About the little baby. Little baby's born. Oh, little baby. 9 weeks later, oh my goodness, look at how much this little baby has changed. Didn't even notice on a day-to-day basis what the difference was. But when I look today versus what a huge change. So in book 4, sutra number 33, it's actually the second to the last sutra, basically says those words, but in Sanskrit, right? Patanjali saying it in Sanskrit. Kshana, the moment. The parinama, the change. Nirgrahya, it is only apprehensible at, do I have an end? Yes. Aparanta, at the end. It is only apprehensible, it's only understandable, it's only seeable at the end. And then I think I'm going to come back to Nikolai for a second, because this is when Nikolai says, change is difficult to perceive while it is happening, especially when the change occurs slowly over a long period of time. Only at the end of the series of changes, when things stop changing, can we fully understand each step that led us to the end result.
Which sutra is that?
Book 4, number 33.
That's great.
So, how do we affect change? How do I do it? Well, first, you have to understand the nature of change. Then, you have to be willing to follow that path. You have to be willing to do the work. And then, keep in mind, you will only be able to see it after some time. Maybe even at the very end, right? So that goes to like effort and perseverance and, determination and stick-to-itiveness and whatever other word you want to say, right? So if I go back to my dieting example and I go on a juice cleanse for 5 days, something might happen, but it probably won't be sustainable and I won't see the result until the end. But if I do something like Weight Watchers, then maybe over the course of a year, maybe I would lose the weight that I wanted to lose, but on a day-to-day basis, I probably wouldn't see the difference. But in order to get there, I have to be able to stick with it. I have to be willing to put in that effort and to have the perseverance and the determination to stay with it for the year. And this is how we change.
It's also interesting in that, just with that example, because usually when those changes are happening gradually, you usually don't see them, and people around you see them before you do.
Yes. Yeah. And so I'm a master of time. Sorry, I'm just so happy. It was going to be too much curriculum. It was going to be too little curriculum. So woohoo! Because the last thing, what my dear?
This was awesome.
I know we should do it every Thursday.
Oh, I'm
after
so
my
glad. Okay. So there's just one last thing that I want to leave you with, and it's a quote from a movie. And it's the Best Exotic Marigold Hotel. And in the Best Exotic Marigold Hotel, they say, everything will be okay in the end. If it's not okay, it's not the end. So, this is our discussion on parinama, change and transformation. Say parinama.
Parinama.
Very good. Can we do Purnamada, please? We should have started with some chant, but because we didn't, but we're going to finish with some chant. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Sit quietly for just a moment. Hands come to Anjali Mudra. Namaste.
Namaste.
Dhanyavada Shishya.
Dhanyavada Acharya.